Hello and welcome to iBridged Leadership Stories. I'm your host, Jeff Harnois. And today I am very excited to introduce you to Ari Berman. Ari is the CEO of Bioteam, a life sciences and IT consulting firm, accelerating scientific discovery by closing the gap between what scientists want to do with data versus what they can do with data. And I can't wait to jump into this conversation with him. Ari's received his PhD in molecular biology with a focus on neuroscience in 2005 from the University of Texas at Austin. His graduate work focused on studying the effects of genetics on addictive behaviors such as alcoholism. His postdoctoral fellowships at the University of California, San Francisco, right in my backyard, and the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, focused on improving our understanding of neurodegenerative diseases and aging, specifically Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, by utilizing a combination of laboratory science and animal models, as well as bioinformatics and computational biology. Ari is an expert in scientific computing, specializing in high performance computing, high performance networks, data centers, storage, cloud, general IT infrastructure, and bioinformatics in data analytics. Please join me in welcoming Ari Berman to the stage. Ari, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate the introduction.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I think that life sciences has not been represented on this particular podcast. So I'm excited to jump into some of the missions around life sciences and IT consulting, and more specifically around leadership. Ari, I know that you've been through the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team with your leadership team, which is one of the programs that iBridged offers. And I'm really interested initially to hear a bit about your experiences, maybe your takeaways, and some of the advantages that you see using those kind of behavioral models.
Sure, yeah, happy to. Yeah, we did that, I guess a year and a half ago or so. And the company looked a bit different back then. We had a very large, what we called extended leadership team. And they all reported to me. And among the list of things I would do differently, that's one of them. But the reality is that they were all, fantastic individuals, very intelligent, very good. And the 5 behaviors was meant to help us focus in on why we couldn't do anything useful because we were stuck.
Ah,
We were stuck. We couldn't do anything. We talked everything to death. It was analysis paralysis. It was, death by committee. It was, all the things. So, any business cliche you have, we had it. Other than everyone was really nice, and that's one of the interesting things is that everyone was very kind to a fault. And so my hope from the 5 behavior and the people who were supporting us at the time on the 5 behaviors was to start breaking through that so that we could be an effective leadership team because we were not. I found myself way in the day to day of everything, and that was an issue. So.
I want to. This conversation reminds me of one that I had with Heather Gilly. She's the former chief people officer of Grammarly. She was talking about an experience that she had as well with 5 behaviors on a leadership team, a C-suite of a very large SaaS company out here in the Bay Area, and talking about something very similar. They were very nice to each other, and the problem with being nice to one another is that it often gets in the way then because you're trying to preserve the relationship of challenging ideas, as an example, pushing back on things that you don't necessarily think are right or agree with, ultimately in search and service of the right answer and the best outcome. And so, like you, she had a very similar experience in going through the 5 behaviors and sort of understanding healthy conflict is a really good place to be if you want to drive a business forward. So, with that in mind, the very first behavior that we measure and then focus on improving is trust. So tell me a little bit about how trust was operationalized and what that looked like in your team dynamic.
Well, we're still working
Yeah.
so,
Mhm.
it's I think it's a journey, not a destination. And trust is required. You know, if you're gonna effectively delegate, you have to trust the people you're delegating to. Otherwise, they're not going to feel like they're being delegated to. A lot of leaders that I know complain that people don't take the authority they're given, or don't take accountability or responsibility for getting things done. And uh, honestly, like me at the time, it's because when they stick their neck out, they get it chopped off. Right? They don't trust that they're going to be able to really do things, and that um the cost of failure is too high for them to stick their necks out. And so that was one of the things we were finding, is that one of the things that surfaced is that, a lovely personality trait of mine that I've had since I was, I don't know, 11, is that I get really defensive sometimes when I feel misunderstood, or when I feel that people are complaining about something that I swear to God I did, or something, right? And the good thing is that this workshop surfaced that, and one very bold person who I adore said, "You get defensive, and we don't feel like you're hearing us, and we just you shut us down." And I'm like, "Oh crap, I guess I do," right? And so I've been working on that since, and that's helped a lot.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story. First of all, thank you for, sharing the vulnerability of, what others would perceive as a weakness. I'm so happy to hear that you have the awareness of it, because now you can do something about it and really sort of create the state that you want. That's brilliant. When we talk about trust, a couple of things come up for me. One is transactional based trust, which is, you do what you say you're going to do, and others can trust that you're going to do the things that you say you're going to do. But the other is more relational or relationship oriented. In other words, I need to know that you've got my back. And when we have both of those forms of trust being operationalized, people can come to you and say, Ari, you're a bit defensive when we give you feedback. And you can say, I can take that feedback because I know you've got my back. Yeah, I love that. I love
Yeah.
everything about that, Ari. That's fantastic.
One of the outcomes of that was that, I essentially gave everyone permission. If I'm being defensive, call me out. I'll stop.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
sometimes you don't recognize it when it's happening. Um,
exactly.
I've tried to put, the mental alarms in place to know when I'm about to. And something I think we can talk about a little bit later are the diversity of neurotypes in organizations, and
Yeah,
how they
yeah,
play a really, really big role. I personally am ADHD, and one of the lovely side effects of ADHD is this thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. And rejection in most ADHD folks is almost felt physically, and that can result in a highly defensive behavior. So I have learned over the years to recognize when I'm about to have that kind of reaction, and just take a beat, take a breath, and that does a lot.
so what a beautiful insight. And I know that that particular field of study would add so much to the work that we do at
Totally.
iBridge, helping people really understand at a much deeper level personality and the influence of personality on interpersonal dynamics, and how neurodiversity informs that. Um, it's just such a brilliant topic. I'd love to dig into a bit more.
I'm about to.
Um, at some point, in fact, let me just say this for the record. At some point, let's have a whole conversation around that and record it for others
Would
to
love that.
take advantage of, because I'd love to go deep into that space.
It's one of the reasons why I ended up in the neuroscience field. Was trying to understand that, and the neurodegenerative diseases that have afflicted my family and people that I loved. But the neuroscience behind that, there are very there are a lot of neurodiverse people in the world, and we don't really think about it. Most neurodiversity can be a superpower if you harness it right.
Right, right. And I think that dynamic is true in the psychometric work that we do as
It
well.
is. Yep.
A lot of people aren't aware that naturally they have some really great strengths. And because they don't have those awarenesses, they often don't know how to harness them, especially from a leadership perspective. in concert with that, there are also some really big natural blind spots. And so if you're not aware of them, you can't do anything about it, and they will continue to sort of sabotage your efficacy from a leadership standpoint. But when you are aware of it, you can do exactly what you've done. You can put those gates and those tripwires in place. And then the other thing that you said, which I think is brilliant, is you've now solicited with the members of your leadership team to be early warnings, identifiers for you. They can say, Ari, hey, that defensiveness is coming up a little bit. I love the fact that you included them in this journey and that they're able to help you in that way. That's brilliant.
Well, I think that's a fundamental thing about trust. I think a lot of senior leaders, CEOs, expect that uh, they know they have to trust their team. I don't know that they understand that they have to be trusted in order for that to happen. Right? It has to go two ways. Right? And throughout my long career of management, one of the things I've always tried to do is empower people. And empowerment is only complete when they feel like they can trust the person empowering them. And empowerment includes being able to challenge that person directly without having anything, uh, you know, and feel hurt, even if the outcome of that discussion isn't quite what they wanted or expected. At least they were heard, and they know they were heard, and empowerment rises from that. And so
Yeah.
that's a fundamental trust issue.
I was smiling when you were talking about, trusting to be trusted. A phrase comes to mind: those who don't trust aren't trusted. And
Absolutely.
I think it sends a signal that, if you don't trust others, there's some barrier there. And so I think that there is a reciprocal lack of trust then that's given to those individuals. The second thing that came up for me, which you said, which I think is a home run, is, chief executives, and it's really executives at most levels, are required to trust the people below them. It's not optional. You don't really have a choice. It doesn't mean you don't feel apprehensive about delegating or giving ownership to those below you, but you're sort of forced to trust that they're going to do the right thing, they're going to make the right decisions, and they're going to take the right actions to achieve the right outcomes. You're sort of forced to do that. Otherwise, you become the bottleneck. And
Right.
so I think getting comfortable with, again, sort of giving trust and receiving trust is probably a key to success from my perspective.
I've spent a lot of my career being the bottleneck and knowing I'm the bottleneck and being frustrated by it. And I think many executives are generally high performers, and high performers have a hard time watching someone else struggle with something they could do easily, which is one of the fundamental things that happens in absence of delegation. Is, well, it'll take me 5 minutes to do it, it'll take me an hour and a half to teach this person how to do it, and then a week for them to fail at it until they get it. So it's just faster and easier if I do it myself. What happens, though, especially if you're a CEO, is then you end up working in the business, you end up doing day to day, you end up just aiming the fire hose at the closest fire, and you cannot move forward. You don't stem the fire, you don't stop the fire, you don't put a safety line around things so that it doesn't burn down the house. You just end up just constantly firefighting, and you cannot work on the business.
Yeah, in fact, the way that I would say that is you become highly reactive,
Highly reactive. Yeah.
which then becomes the absence of being strategic and proactive, right? It literally takes those cycles away from you because you are in the business, working in the business and not working on your business.
Hmm.
Yeah, really, really brilliant. I often also think this is maybe downstream a little bit to this, the analogy that you were giving of, it would take me 10 minutes to do the thing, it takes me an hour to teach it or an hour and a half to teach it, and then all the cycles to learn and fail. When you remove that dynamic, when you remove that process from you've sort of compromised in some way the interpersonal relationship. You missed the opportunity to develop capabilities and capacities and competencies in your team, and that's a force multiplier, allowing you to move forward. You've missed all of that, and the individual, the employee, has missed the growth opportunity that would have been presented there. And so, if you are thinking about the true mission of your organization as a chief executive should, you'll never want to miss those opportunities unless it is, mission critical that the thing gets done in the next 10 minutes. You should always then defer to, I'm going to defer to the development option here, which takes more time.
I think that people are pretty good at measuring individual productivity. It's a little more abstract to understand a team's productivity because you want to ascribe productivity to each individual, including yourself. And what is missing there is, so one of the basic tenets of science, of being a scientist, is the idea of collaboration because no one person can have all the expertise, no one person can have all the abilities, and everybody has unconscious biases that limit the way that they're going to interpret or bring things forward. So fundamentally in science, collaboration gives a more complete picture of the problem that's trying to be solved and makes it more likely that knowledge is going to come to bear from the research. Same thing is true in teams. If you have an effective team, the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. And I've had to learn as somebody who loves doing things, right? I've had to back away and to learn to marvel at look at this team that's functioning with me doing very little, doing way more than I could myself. And if you are a company that needs to scale, which is everybody, uh, you know, you're not going to scale if you don't get out of the business and if you don't empower a team. And you'll find that people are going to think of things in ways that you didn't, and it's going to be better than you could have done. And that's really, really satisfying.
Yeah, the force multiplier effect.
Mhm.
Mhm. And so again, when you take away that development opportunity by just doing it yourself, you've negated all of that extra force that you develop when you develop the team. Yeah, really well said. So trust is foundational. The second behavior in the five behaviors is healthy conflict,
Yeah.
and they are interoperable. When you have good trust, when you have healthy trust, you can in fact have healthy conflict. Let's talk a little bit about that from your perspective.
Boy, I don't know where to start. This goes deep into childhood trauma, really. But uh, you know, I you know, I'm a people pleaser. I just am. And what I've learned in my journey in being a CEO is that being a people pleaser and being an effective executive are not compatible. uh, you you can't do it. And I've had to overcome a lot of personal demons. Luckily I have an amazing therapist, and she challenges me directly all the time, and in the end, if you don't make the hard decisions, if you don't challenge people directly, you end up with rampant toxicity. And the toxicity ends up creating a low morale, low performance environment that is exactly the opposite of what you're intending to do. And so I had to learn to really challenge people directly. I'm also a very highly empathetic person. You know, I think we'll talk about DISC in a little bit, but I'm a DI, right? I like to get things done. But I didn't used to be a DI. It wasn't until I got over my, um, you know, sort of lack of conflict, my avoidance in relationships, that the D came out, and the D was necessary in order to do this job. And so one of the things that a different, completely different model that I read years and years ago is something called Radical Candor. And basically, it just says, look, if you're going to challenge directly and not have it be an absolute fight, you also have to care deeply, right? So if you're challenging someone directly in a way that is intended to make them better because they can be, it's a totally different thing and it lands differently. And uh, it's about, hey, this is a way for you to level up. This is a way for you to advance. This is a way for you to help yourself and help me and make everything better. Because right now you're not, but you can, right? So it's about you can directly uh, directly challenge somebody and also help them at the same time.
Yeah, and in fact, you used the word enablement, previously in the conversation, and that's exactly how I look at it as well. We look at the limitations and we raise the awareness of the limitation.
Mhm.
We then talk about the desired state. If this is where you are today, if this is your current state with this limitation, where would you like to be? And think about it a little bit like setting a goal. And then all of the conflict that comes in between there is in service of that new level that you're talking about. And so that modeling is often very helpful for folks who are conflict avoidant or the opposite. When they get into conflict, they escalate. It allows people to sort of level out and be in that journey of growth. So I really love that perspective.
Well, so it's interesting because the book Radical Candor graphs this against four quadrants, right? Where the y-axis is caring deeply, the x-axis is challenging directly, and so the Radical Candor obviously follows in the upper right hand. Um, where I was on the opposite. I cared deeply, but I didn't challenge directly, and what the book calls it is ruinous empathy, right?
Ruin empathy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where you care, but it doesn't go anywhere. It makes things worse. And then a lot of people who are like, "Oh my God, my CEO is such a jerk," right? What's going on there, right? It's that you challenge directly, but don't care deeply, and so that's obnoxious aggression,
Huh.
right? And then if you
Yeah.
do neither, right? The book calls it manipulative insincerity,
Mhm.
right? So none of those obviously are good, but
Right.
um, I think when you're looking for productive, healthy conflict, the only way to have conflict is obviously trust, which the five behavior starts with. They have to trust that they're going to be heard and not the axe swung at them. And you know, and frankly, the leader needs to decide that they don't know everything because you don't. I need the feedback. I'm not, amazingly, I'm not on the ground doing all the things anymore. So I don't know what's going on. If
Yeah.
someone's asking me to make a call, I need the data to do it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I'm going to reflect it back and say, well, what would you do? And that's new. That's new for our company, new for Bioteam, and it's really working out well. But um, the only way to get to healthy conflict is if everyone truly cares about each other and about the progress in the organization.
hmm Yeah, I love that. I love that. The idea about caring for each other, and again, psychometrics, I think, are the great decoder for helping people connect, collaborate, communicate, and then ultimately care about each other.
Absolutely.
When I understand your psychometric, I understand how you process information. I understand what information you prefer to receive and how you prefer to receive it. I understand your communication style and preferences. So when we're having a conversation, I can say, what do you actually mean by this? And go into a detail level or stay at a strategic level based on knowing, your particular personality type.
Mm.
I also have a little peek under the hood in terms of how you might show up in conflict. And so having that knowledge of psychometrics, first about yourself, again, your own awareness, what are your big best strengths naturally? What are those blind spots? And then how are you able to read and then therefore interact with others? It's gold. It's absolute gold from my perspective.
Another thing that came up, our parent company came in to do a strategy session with us, and we thought about doing all the psychometrics thing. They're big fans of the five dysfunction of a team, and we did the whole assessment in that again. But one of the things they brought was and it was an experiment. Was this idea of using a Johari window, which I hadn't heard of before, which is a way to recognize your blind spots with the rest of your team. And it was fascinating because everyone was like, "Oh, wow, geez, really?" And so it was yet another peek inside of how things are. And so um, obviously, there's a lot of tools to use. I don't. One of the things I would say is you could read every book on the planet, and you could bring a new tool every week or a new concept every week to the company, and you'll never make progress. You just have to dig in and try something. There are a lot of people who just love management theory. Management theory and management practice are very, very different, and you got to
Mhm.
see how it works in the organization.
What's ironic about that, Ari, is even based on psychometrics like this, for example, um, those who love theory and the knowledge are going to be the C types generally, and maybe even the S types.
Right.
Those who want to do something with it and turn it into practice are always going to be led by, by D types in general. And I types are going to be enthusiastic about anything that, helps everyone feel good and be happy. And so just understanding that dynamic will help you understand who's going to be change resistant and who's going to be pro change and actually driving change. And again, there's no value judgment there. There's value in the resistance because they're asking hard questions. Is this the right thing to do? And when you answer them, and ultimately then when you get them on board, you have a lot of forward momentum as a result of that. But being able to decode people's resistance based on personality type is probably one of the most strategic leadership tools I can think of.
It really does help. It helps people understand each other. It helps people understand why somebody might react a certain way if you can apply it. A lot of people, a lot of people don't have enough self-awareness to know how to apply the information, right? And that's a challenge. I've seen a lot of executive teams in my time. The one I have now is phenomenal because everybody has an awareness of their own weaknesses, and they've all called them out at various times. And we've all given each other permission to just say, "Look, if I'm doing this, tell me,"
Yeah.
because they may not recognize it instantly, and that has created uh, a situation where people can just say what's on their mind, and they should. And I,
Yeah.
you know, and
This aligns so well with, we haven't mentioned it yet, but what's called vulnerability based trust.
yeah,
When you extend that permission to others to shine a light on either poor behaviors or poor attributes or weaknesses or gaps in an effort to raise the awareness, which then gives the individual options to do something with it or to choose to do something with it and make improvements. When you have that level of vulnerability based trust, that's possible. When you don't have it, those challenges remain unspoken and therefore unknown.
absolutely. Um, it's tangential but related. Um, Thinking about how to create an effective team of an entire company, that's also a team. And our company is a consulting company, so our business is people's expertise and trust. That's what it is. Our sales, if you can call it sales, is building trusting relationships with people so that they will trust that if you come in and work with them and they pay you for it, you're going to make a difference in their world in a positive way. Which, by the way, you can't do consulting well if you don't challenge directly. So it's very interesting, right? It was always real easy for me to do as a consultant, but it was hard for me to do as a CEO or as an executive, because it's interesting because I was getting paid to tell people to do this, to do things, and to change as a consultant. As a CEO, I had to see these people every day, and if I pissed them off, oh my god, what's going to happen? It turns out that even if you piss somebody off, as long as you talk about it and work the conflict to the end, the relationship's stronger.
Yeah. 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 Lencioni talks about what he calls the conflict continuum.
Yeah.
And it's that place where we have artificial harmony on the left, where people are too nice to each other, right?
Yep.
Artificial harmony. And there's a niceness, but of very little effectiveness. And so we start moving down that continuum. The other end of the continuum he describes as hell, where it's nasty, it's mean spirited, it's meant to win at your expense. Somewhere in the middle there is going to be uncomfortable conflict, but it's the right place, it's the healthy place for conflict. And when teams don't push far enough, they never cross that line where it sometimes goes too far. And from Lencioni's perspective, every once in a while, that idea of going too far is really healthy. And it goes right back to what you were saying, which is when you go a little too far and then you go through the recovery process, you actually build really strong bonds and strengthen relationships. It's like, let's talk about what we did there. Let me take ownership for my behavior or my words or my actions, and you do the same. And then we can have an agreement where, let's not do that again. Those kinds of relationships are some of the highest performing ones I've ever seen.
I agree. And one of the things I've seen that limits that from happening, and it's especially true in our company because our company does wacko things for clients, right? Like people tend to call us when they have no idea what to do next, and our goal is to just drive science forward and make a difference in the world, which is great. It's a compelling mission. It helped everyone, people have stuck around through some pretty crappy internal things. I think because the mission is compelling.
So, one of the programs that iBridged uses with organizations, with our clients, is a program called Work of Leaders. Very much like the five behaviors, it assesses where the current state of an organization on vision, alignment, and execution. I know that topically, those are key success criteria, not only for chief executives, but for leadership teams in general. I would even go so far as to say that if you're working on a project team, having all three of those is critically important. I'd like to hear your perspective on those three elements. Before I do, I just want to share one quick observation. When we assess organizations on vision, alignment, and execution, which is much more of a competency based assessment versus five behaviors, which is behavioral, what we find is organizations are often good at two of those three, vision, alignment, and execution, and they don't know they're not good at the third one. And so we go through the process of doing that assessment, and it becomes that awareness piece you were talking about earlier. It's like, oh, we didn't, we've got these D types in the organization who are very vision oriented, and then they want to skip right to execution, and they can't figure out why we're not getting things done because they missed the alignment step.
Yep.
Right? The organization isn't with them.
Yep.
Or we have the C types who are very, very executionally focused, but they're only making incremental improvements, right? The exponential big leaps aren't coming and they can't figure out why. And it's because their visioning component isn't really where it needs to be. So anyway, it's really interesting to go work with leadership teams, sort of see that part of their business and then understand where they are from a competency standpoint. But I'd love to hear from you about, as the chief executive of Bioteam, vision alignment and execution, how they play a role in your leadership style.
Yeah, honestly, that's something we're working on still. I think that one of our issues that has been surfaced through uh, engagement surveys and check-ins with our staff is that we don't communicate enough, right?
Uh,
And after we were acquired last year, to them, we went into a hole and they didn't know what was going on, and nothing was different, nothing was changing. It wasn't on purpose. It's just, I was like, well, sorry, I've been busy, but that's not a good excuse. You can't
yeah,
do that. You
yeah.
cannot do that. You have to communicate. The first step to alignment is communication, right? And so
Brilliant.
you cannot align if people aren't aligned and know what's going on. It's this idea of going back to the bottom of the pyramid. You can't have trust without transparency, right? And so um, lack of communication feels like a lack of transparency, even if that's not the intent.
Right.
And uh, in some ways, you almost can't over communicate. We are a virtual company, which means we don't have a physical office anywhere since 2002. Since before it was, it was easy to do or cool, and because we're distributed all over the U.S., it's really easy to lose somebody. It's really easy to have their engagement just go way off, or they didn't see something, and you know, uh, people these days don't read email. So if you send an email, they're not going to see it. So you also have to put it out in Slack, and then you also have to tell them,
Right.
on on a meeting about it. But transparency is really, really important. And holding back information or forgetting to communicate it or spinning it to avoid conflict, right? That's as Lencioni says, that's politics, and that is not going to get you somewhere. I've always been a very transparent person, but I don't always remember, oh, we need to communicate this. I made assumptions that people under me were communicating it, and they weren't. I didn't ask them to. I just figured they were. Right? None of that's good. So, um, and the flip side of that is that a lot of times people won't communicate things because they don't think they have the expertise to do it. And then people won't question things because they feel like they should know something that they don't. And that's the imposter syndrome thing, and we have a lot of that in our company. um, as people were like, I don't belong in this role. And I think some imposter syndrome is healthy because that allows self-reflection. That allows you to go, oh, what am I doing wrong? I'll tell you this, from a management perspective, it's always been my assumption as a manager that I'm doing something wrong if something's not going well with an employee, not immediately, they suck. Okay, what did I do wrong as their manager
Love that.
to get them to have them be at this point? And only when I exhaust what I could have done is it then on the employee to really fix that, right? And that involves, letting them know when they've done something wrong, letting them know when they when you've done something wrong, right? And that dissolves imposter syndrome. Now, how this leads to alignment, right? You have to align. I don't care what your company does. I don't care what it makes. I don't care
Yep.
anything.
How it does it.
Companies are organisms. They are.
Yeah, I love
We
that.
are a
Mhm.
group of people operating as an organism in some ways, right? And it very much goes through cycles. It very much goes through all the homeostatic mechanisms and whatever. And as a result, if you don't align the people, it's not going to work, right? And so, and this is something we've struggled with actually. Is we have started communicating. The executive team started putting out just a weekly newsletter of, in each, we sort of round robin at each one of us, authors at a different week from our perspective. And it's been appreciated. It's almost over communication, but they're getting it all the time. That's the first step to anchoring change, right? Because you can start change, you can even communicate it well, everyone can seem to be aligned, but then it doesn't stick,
Mhm.
right? And so this is essentially, you need at least a lean, light change management process, and you have to make sure everybody is aligned. And one of the things I think that I've always naturally done, but didn't really do it, understand it until I read the five dysfunctions of the team, is this idea of disagree and commit.
Mhm. Mhm.
You're not going to please everybody. You're not going to, and that's hard for me. I need to please everyone, all right? But if you disagree, you have to let everyone disagree and commit if they're a part of enabling change.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to take that concept a little bit further. What comes up for me, Amazon, one of the world's, biggest, best brands, has 14 leadership principles. One of their leadership principles is have a backbone, disagree, and commit. And when I think about that through the lens of the five behaviors of a cohesive team, you've got to have trust to be able to have that conflict where you can push back, where you can disagree, where you can say, I don't think that's the right idea, but you still trust the people in the process enough to say, even though I don't agree with this, I'm going to commit to it. And I think it's brilliant in terms of how it sort of incorporates, all of the behaviors, but how it really unlocks effectiveness. The second piece of this is the commit component. When we tie that back to alignment, it's not enough to just share the information. Sharing the information should come with an ask, and that ask should be, I need you to commit to this. Are you committed to it? Because the people who raise their hand and say, I'm committed to it, you can take them, you can take that at face value. It's the people who say, I can't commit. Those are the folks that need some more convincing, some more influence, some more interaction to be able to get them to commit. But once you have the commitment, alignment becomes something really, really useful.
100%. And everyone views things differently. I've communicated things that I thought were really clear, and people just didn't get it. right? And the only way to remedy that is to have people ask questions.
Yeah.
And
Well, to push for the commitment and sort of set the expectation. I'm going to ask for your commitment. I don't want you to give it to me until you fully understand what we're doing, what the expectations are. I want you to withhold your commitment intentionally and purposefully until we get you to the place where you fully understand what we're doing and what we're asking. Don't give it to me early because you want to please me. I don't want that. I want to earn your commitment
right.
by making sure that you fully understand and are engaged. You don't have to agree with it, but I want to get to your commitment by making sure that you're heard, by making sure that you understand, making sure that you can support.
Yeah, it's necessary. And as managers in the organization, uh, what we've started doing is asking people, so what did you think of that?
Yeah.
And the other thing about neurotypes and personalities is that people process things at different speeds. I happen to be a fast processor. I can sort of go on the fly. There's a lot of people that are like, I need a week. I got to think about it. Right?
Yeah. I tell people I'm a 24-hour guy.
Yeah.
If we have a client issue and a decision has to be made, I'll make it. I don't have any problems with that. I'm comfortable with that now because I've sort of balanced that with this idea. I made the best decision I could with the information that I had.
Hmm.
Okay. But if I have my preference, let me process it overnight. Let me, the colloquial term for that is let me sleep on it. Um, but really, the idea is I want, and I let go of it. I just let my body do its thing. I'm not grinding on it. I've thought about it, I've processed, and then I'm just going to let it rest for a minute. And usually by the next day, I have a tremendous amount of clarity and then conviction in the decisions that I want to make.
And whenever you're trying to get people to commit, agree and commit or disagree and commit, either one, they need to understand that. And you also need to communicate in a way that they understand where they fit into it.
Yeah.
There's sort of this whiffum and wham thing, right? What's in it for me and why are we here? And you always have to, there always has to be something in it for them,
Hmm.
right? They have to see why they should do it. Because in a lot of ways, they're like, I don't care. Right. I don't see how this affects me at all. And that's not them being jerks and it's not them being self centered. It's not them doing, everybody has to balance that. People say, oh, we have a no or low ego environment. Well, that's terrible because that means you're all pushovers. Right. If you have a high or overwhelming degree of ego, all of you are jerks. Right. You have to be in the middle. You can't be a pushover. So your ego has to have some strength and resilience to it, which means you have to pay attention to how things hit you, but
Hmm.
also enough humbleness to work together.
Yeah, it's conviction with humbleness is really how I look at it as well.
Yeah,
When you start getting out of bounds, you start creating more, unnecessary resistance in an organization.
absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Ari, I have to tell you, I've enjoyed the conversation up to this point. Um, we are going to get back together and have a conversation around
Great.
neurodiversity and especially how it, from a leadership perspective. I can't wait to do that with you. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions that I ask all of my guests. Please feel free to have some fun with it if that's on the table. But if you had the ability to wave a magic wand or push a button and go back, 20 years or more and, have a conversation with it yourself, what advice would you give yourself 20 or more years ago?
Oh boy. Well, for one thing, I would say don't drink that. That's not good. Um, uh, kidding there, but boy, so 20 years ago, even I'd say 7 years ago,
Okay.
never would I have thought that I'd be a CEO. Right, my background is in technology and science, not business. I found that I really enjoyed business, both from a technology and scientific and a people standpoint. I've always really been fascinated by and liked people. Right, in science, I'm one of the rare extroverts. A lot of people go into science to get away from people and to hide behind knowledge and things like that. But you have to be a people
Deep
person.
thinking, deep, meaningful work. Yeah.
All that, right? They're not mutually exclusive, but they think they are. I think one of the things I would say going back is, and I think I've always kind of been this way, but I would send it home. My One of the things my therapist categorizes me as a person is somebody who runs through open doors. If there's an open door, I'm going to run through it. I might run back if it's terrible on the other side. You don't know what's on the other side, but basically, my neurotype allows me to seek out opportunities and see them where
Love
maybe
that.
others don't see them.
Mhm.
I didn't always take them. I overthought them in the
Oh,
past, and um, you know, getting over the risk aversion, I think, is a really, really big thing. Being a people pleaser comes with a healthy dose of risk aversion, which is one of the reasons why you don't want to, have conflict. And so I think one of the things I would say is, just go for it. Um, People have predetermined your path. Screw that. Do what. No, okay. So this is what I would reduce it to: trust your instinct, because from a neuroscience standpoint, instinct is your brain processing things that you can't rationalize.
oh, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, yeah.
So trust it. It's telling you something. Trust it. And you cannot purely rationalize life. You can't purely rationalize business. You can't purely rationalize people. You have to feel it, and you have to be okay with feeling it. A lot of people avoid feelings because they're hard and they're messy, and it's messy. But trust it. I
Hmm.
think that's one of the things I would say. And
Brilliant. I love that. And I absolutely love that. I think any of our viewers and listeners are going to take something away from that one in particular. That's outstanding. Thank you. Um, Similar type of question. If you met, I often think of this as younger people, but I, it doesn't have to be somebody who's young. I think of it as somebody who's maybe new coming into your field. So maybe younger, but also maybe more mature, doing a career transition. What advice would you give them that might help them be successful in your field?
uh, this one comes off the tongue real fast. It's okay not to know. In fact,
Mm,
it's important not to know.
one of my
Saying "I
favorite.
don't know" is the most important answer in the world,
Mhm.
because it opens up to, "Oh, cool. Let me explain it to you. Let me help you understand." A lot of people go into environments. I went into this job going, "Oh, I know how to be a CEO. Oh, yeah, I've
Right.
seen it done." I didn't know anything. I had
Yeah.
no idea. You
Yeah.
do not know what it's like until you're in it. And that I think that's true with anything, honestly. So go in understanding that this is all new, and that that's okay, and that if you chose a good organization to work with, they're going to understand that.
Hmm.
So say "I don't know."
I think
Offer explanations.
I think chose a good organization, but also setting the right expectations. One of my favorite answers is I don't know.
Yeah.
And partially for the reason that you've said, which is I get to create an interpersonal connection by allowing someone else to teach and educate me, to give me the gift of knowledge. And I love that. And I'm very respectful and appreciative of it when I get it. But I think the other component then is it gives you an opportunity to demonstrate that I don't have the answer now, but I'm going to go get it. So let me go be diligent. You can now trust that when I don't have my judgment, when I don't have an answer, I'm going to go get the answer and I'm going to bring it back. You can trust me to do that. I think the other component is, the mistake of I don't know is, ties back to the conversation we were having earlier about imposter syndrome, which is if you don't know and you have imposter syndrome, you're going to be tempted to fake it. And faking it in my world is deadly,
Oh yeah.
because the experts will see that you don't know what you say you know and that you are in fact faking it, which to me is not only disingenuous, it's dishonest.
Yes.
And ultimately that leads to mistrust and distrust. It erodes the very fabric and the connective tissue from a trusting standpoint. So I love I don't know. I love that phrase, and thank you for bringing that up here. um, my final question of the day is, what advice would you give to your peer group? What tips for success, what perspectives do you have that you think are, the thing that is going to make people in your, chief executives, not only in life sciences, but chief executives across the board? What's something that you know or have learned that has been a secret to your success?
Go to therapy.
Therapy.
Go to therapy. Like, that's sort of my flippant answer. I've got a deeper one, but my flippant answer to that is you don't know everything and you shouldn't know everything. And I find this more true of male CEOs, is that you don't have to put on this crazy macho male bravado BS. You just don't have. In fact, that's the wrong thing to do.
Exactly right.
You need to be vulnerable. You need to be approachable. You need to be, don't take yourself too seriously. If you find yourself identifying yourself as the CEO of that organization, you're doing something wrong, right? And if you want to do a really good job, you have to balance the needs of the organization with the needs of the company or with the needs of the people, because they're one and the same. I'll borrow from Star Trek, where they say because I'm a total nerd, my first duty is to the ship. The same is true with the company. My first duty is
Right.
to the company. However, in order for that company to operate, I also need to consider the people in that equation. Maybe not always individuals. Some individuals are going to fall by the wayside. Some people aren't going to get there. Vulnerability, being approachable, um, not coming across as I'm in charge, right? You will be way more in charge if you don't do that, right? People will trust you. People will trust your decision making, right? And it can be vulnerable. And then also the flip side of that is don't be too reactive.
Mhm.
Executive presence is used in a lot of ways, but I'll say that in my executive training, the most beneficial thing I noted is that I tend to be a pretty passionate guy, right? I've got to narrow that passion down to something that isn't going to freak people out, right? You can't blow up at your staff, right? You also can't go massage your staff's shoulders. Don't do that, right? Like, don't do any of that, right? If you're gonna go out drinking with people, limit yourself so that you can remain clear-headed
Mhm.
because everyone's watching you. And boy, some people will come after you the first chance they get. Don't give them the opportunity.
Don't give
Still
them
be a good person.
Yeah, love that. That's brilliant. Ari, thank you so much for joining us today. Seems like a lot of really, really valuable insights and perspectives that I think other leaders are going to be able to take advantage of and possibly even incorporate into their own leadership styles today. It was an honor to have you on our show, and I can't wait to do the next one with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks so much, Ari.
All right, take care.